We got this video here. Somebody recommended in my Discord from Too Lazy to Try. I mean, I've seen some of his stuff. I've been reacting to some stuff here and there. He pumps out bangers. So this one's the worst Joe Rogan Experience guest of all time. So that sounds exciting. So let's do it. Let's get on Joe Rogan Experience so we can be the worst guest of all time.
So in this video, I'm going to be taking a look back at a classic JRE episode, number 1282, with Adam Conover. This is probably one of Joe's most
I think this is I think, from if I remember correctly, the issue with this one more than anything else was that I think they had a conversation, I think, about trans women in sports and about how there's a biological advantage, and Adam, or whatever his name is, just wouldn't concede to that. So,
but it's one of those things where it's so bad it's actually entertaining. I mean, this guy Adam, he did not know what he got himself into, and it's like he's never had a conversation before where somebody's actually disagreed with him because he was not prepared for something.
By the way, from what I've seen, and it's limited from Adam, he seems like a smart guy. Like, you know, we all get it wrong sometimes, except for me, of course. But yeah,
question what he was saying, and I don't think he's thought through 90% of the stuff he's talking about, so it did not go very well for him. So I'm pretty surprised he'd even go on the podcast. I'll give him credit for that, I guess, but I don't even know if he really knew what the podcast is like, because if you try telling Joe Rogan one of the main reasons men are better at sports than women is just because men created the sports, you better expect some pushback.
Well, I mean, there's probably some truth there, right? Men are going to create something that they're good at. That's why men created sports. Women are going to create something that they're good at. That's why women created nothing, right? So that's really what... I'm just kidding. But yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. What would be a sport that women would be good at over men? Nagging me. Take the garbage out. I don't know. That's just a sport my wife's good at. But apparently I'm just not very good at the sport of taking the garbage out, so I guess there's the problem.
Which I don't know if he's prepared for, because all it took was one question from Joe, and his whole argument fell apart.
In sports, one of the things, our assumption that men have an advantage over women, right? In sports. In sports, yeah.
Our assumption?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let me expand on it. Our assumption that men have an advantage over women in sports is partially based on the fact that so many of the sports were designed for male bodies, right? They're optimized for male bodies.
I mean, that's not necessarily wrong, I guess, if you want to look at it like that. Men created sports, I guess. But wow, I don't know. What's it like? Unironically, what's something that like women are? Like, I'm not like I'm like a gymnast. Is that true? Maybe. Okay, maybe. I don't know. I guess I don't know.
Right. Basketball, for example. Right.
Yeah.
How is that optimized for male bodies?
It's like the height of the basket. You know,
yeah. But that's the thing, is if you lower the basket, men will just still be good at it. By the way, I think, who was it? Was it Shaq who said that they should lower the baskets in women's basketball so they can get more dunks? Be more entertaining. It's a smart idea. Smart idea.
The way that the ball moves around, you know, like if
the way the ball moves around.
If we're gonna say that,
yeah, if you made the ball a square, women would be a lot better at it. Yes.
I'm gonna say that.
I mean, did he really?
Maybe if they used a crochet ball. It's so silly.
Really expect Joe not to question this. Honestly, somebody needed to. Clearly, the people around him are not doing the job, and they're just agreeing with all this nonsense. Because, I mean, all it took was one question. How is basketball designed for males? And his response was hilarious. The height of the hoop, any height that hoop is at, men are going to be dominating. And then also the way the ball moves around. I don't even know what he means by that. And he clearly doesn't either.
Let's see. I looked it up. Some female athletes perform better than men in certain sports. Female athletes have been outperforming men for years due to their naturally strong muscles and bones. What? It's not only in physical sports where females excel, but also in areas like swimming, biking, and running. What? Long distance. Apparently, women might be better at long distance swimming. So more cardio sports? Some female. I mean, okay. I'm trying to find like a sport that they dominate. Archery, maybe? I really don't know. Okay.
He started laughing right after he said it. Hopefully he realized how ridiculous it sounded right after he said it, but it doesn't look like it, because last year he went on Hassan's live stream and he was talking about this podcast and he was just doubling down on it, and he sounded just as ridiculous as he did back then. And even
well, yeah, Hassan's not going to give any pushback either, because he has a similar perspective, but he just doesn't believe it. Like, that's the thing about Hassan. I don't think he believes anything he says. You know, that's the thing. I think Adam believes what he says. But Hassan just doesn't care. I could tell. All right, I'm an empath.
Hassan was pushing back on it a little bit in like the most polite way possible. You'd tell he didn't really want to get into an argument, but I think he even realized how ridiculous Adam sounded here.
The entire system of male versus female sports is prejudiced, and we should demolish the whole thing and come up with a system of sports that everybody can participate in, because
did Hassan shift his perspective after the last time?
Sports are just a part of life.
People will say that that's like discriminatory towards women, though, because then it's like all men will always dominate. Men will always dominate that co-ed sport because of the averages. Because of I get it. I mean, I understand what you're saying.
Take soccer, right? How would you adjust the rules of soccer very slightly?
Or maybe he's just saying that this is so preposterous even Hassan can't agree with it. Wow, incredible stuff.
In order to,
I remember last time we looked at like Hassan was doubling down that trans women should be able to compete in sports, which unfortunately I don't think that they should be able to, because there seems to be a biological advantage based on the data, based on the numbers.
Make it, build more gender parity into soccer. You could do it. We made the sports up.
I know, but there's so much there's so much tradition that people will refuse to do that. They'll say you're trying to game the system in a way that it's worse. The outcomes are worse overall because co-ed automatically means worse, because as it stands currently, co-ed is worse.
And he sounds like somebody that knows nothing about sports. If he honestly thinks you just change a rule slightly and then all of a sudden men and women are going to be equal in soccer and basketball.
New rules. Men have to play on their knees. And then there you go. It'll be fair, I guess. I don't know.
And his reasoning for this is always just, we invented sports and men invented sports, so that means they're better. That's the only reason they're better. I mean, who believes that?
And I try to get him to look at it with a bigger picture and say hey man, sports are social constructions. We made them up.
Shit.
We designed sports such that the most popular ones are designed for a male body. What if
I don't think that we designed them intentionally to make them better for men or whatever. I mean, obviously we just didn't. They were designed, and men, I guess because men were the ones that were doing the sport more because women didn't seem to have as much of an interest. And part of that's probably social. Yeah, that's it. Also, dudes watch the sport. So I don't know. Okay.
We didn't do that. What if women's gymnastics? Men can't do that shit, right? Because there's etc. What if we
No, but they can do men's gymnastics.
invented sports that we did not have a problem with this with, right? Because sports is just a fun thing to do. Sports is something that everyone should be able to participate in. So what if we invented some less gendered sports? He was not willing to entertain that conversation. He was I was like, is this not interesting? And he wouldn't go there with me.
And nobody's stopping you from creating a new sport. If he really thinks there's a sport out there where men and women could be equal and it'd be competitive and entertaining, then go ahead and start it. But
yeah, maybe esports. I guess we'll see. I don't know, though. Maybe esports. But here's my thing, and this might be wrong, and you could criticize me. But the only professional, the best women that play video games, like League of Legends, for instance, are the ones that start dating a grandmaster, and they play support. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I started dating the grandmaster League of Legends player, and now I'm a fucking platinum or whatever, a support, and he's my 80 carry. And it's like, oh, I wonder why that is. I wonder what's the correlation there. How did you do that? What did you do? Yeah, I'm a good support. Oh, okay. It's like having a good battery, It might last a little longer, but at the end of the day, what's it really doing? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, it's turning it on. Got a good battery. Okay, whatever. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying. That's about supports. Just be real.
To think that basketball and soccer, billion-dollar industries should start experimenting with their rules so they can try to make men and women equal so they can start playing together. That will ever happen. And I don't think female athletes are even arguing for that. Obviously they want to get paid more, and some of them once in a while be like, yeah, I could be an NBA player. But in reality, if you're like, hey, you got to go out tomorrow night and guard LeBron James, I don't know if they're interested in that. And of course, one of the reasons Adam is making this argument is because he wants trans people, trans women in particular, to be able to compete with biological women. And of course, Joe is completely against that. And he goes on this whole rant about how unfair it is and why it's unfair.
Dude.
And then at the end of it, Adam's just like, yeah, I disagree with that. And Joe's like, what do you disagree with? He's like, well, listen, I'm not an expert on this subject, and you're going to be hearing that a lot. He says that probably 20 times throughout this podcast. It seems like whenever he gets cornered, he's like, well, I'm not an expert on this. I didn't know if you're aware of that. It's like, yeah, I think we could tell once you start talking about how the only reason men are better at basketball is because the way the ball moves around.
So if you're a woman and you're a natural woman and you don't take any extra hormones or male hormones, you're not taking steroids or any sort of performance-enhancing drugs, you're doing your very best to compete and you're at the top of the heap. But then someone comes along that was a man for 30 years and decides they're going to be a woman, and this has happened, and literally transitioned a few months ago and competes as a woman.
The only thing I want to correct on that is, like, no one just decided that they wanted to be trans. Like, that's not really how it works. You know what I mean? Like, usually it's like a long-term process. So somebody was trans, you know, they've been struggling with their identity for their whole life, and then they transition, and they don't want, it's, you know, I just want to make sure that people understand that nobody's transitioning to be good at sports. They just happen to like sports and then transition. And so, like, nobody's transitioning to be dubious in some capacity. But I still think that at the end of the day, if you look at the numbers, there is an advantage, especially if you go through a male puberty, and that, like, it's potentially dangerous for women. You've seen, like, what that UFC fighter got, like, her skull cracked open and stuff, and, you know, it's just unfortunate. It's just the way it is.
Destroys
how it is.
records and dominates you in that sport. That's bullshit, and that's not competing on a level playing field. That's a person who's biologically a male and who is a male for 30 plus years of having testosterone run through their body and affect their tendon strength. And
I don't think it's unfair. Sports are about competing, but maybe I'm wrong. What? Competition? Well, yeah, sports are. What do you mean? I don't understand. It's unfair. So, like, yes, sports are about biological advantage and whatnot, but if you allow trans women into sports, like, they will go to the top of the ladder, and cisgender women will effectively be displaced. Like, they might not stop playing, but the best players are going to be trans women. It's going to create, like, an unfair advantage. So, yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
The shape of their bones and the mechanical advantages of the male hips versus the female hips, and then they're competing with smaller people who have been a woman their whole life. It's not fair. It's as much cheating as taking steroids when the other person doesn't, or taking performance-enhancing drugs when the other person doesn't. Maybe even more so. Maybe even more so because you also have, there's a bunch of advantages in terms of reaction time that males enjoy. It's some significant difference in reaction time between males and even untrained males versus female professional athletes.
Well, I disagree, and
what do you disagree about?
I've already, well, my main point being,
I wonder what the reaction time thing's about. I wonder if that's something because, like, a lot of guys, I don't know, play video games or something, or if that's just, like, something that's somewhat inherent. Like, do women just have, is that really, like, a thing? Do women just have bad reaction, or not bad, but, like, less reaction time? Because I see people talking about that when it comes to cars, and they're like, oh, women have worse reaction time than men, which is why when I'm driving with my wife, she's always like, slow down, you know? But I just have better reaction time, so I can almost hit the guy and then stop because I know what I'm doing. But then I would imagine that women would compensate with that when it comes to driving by just driving safer, which they seem to do. They seem to drive slower, which gives them more time to, you know, react, and gives them more time on their trip to getting home. So it's just kind of interesting. Very interesting. Evolution for hunting. Gotcha. Okay, maybe.
The one that I already made,
Maybe
right?
you're right.
That, like, I don't think that there is such a thing as a perfectly level playing field. I think we decide what kind of playing field we want to have.
Well, that part's true.
We do make the distinction where we don't allow men to compete in women's divisions.
And I think that distinction may be breaking down a bit, right? And I think it may be time to break down that distinction a little
So
bit.
you think that males should be able to compete in the women's division of weightlifting?
No, I don't necessarily.
But they can if they transition.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of stuff to break down, right? And I'm not an expert on the subject, right? So it's just sort of off the top of my head.
And him saying he's not an expert on the situation is basically just saying I'm not trans and we should talk to a trans person about this. He makes it sound like only trans people should be able to give their opinions on these topics because they're the most affected by it. But if you're talking about sports, then female athletes are obviously going to be really affected by this. So you should probably listen to what they have to say. And I'm not an expert, you know, I'm not claiming to be an expert here, but I would imagine most of them probably really aren't that into the idea of somebody transitioning and then coming into their sport and dominating it. You know, they could lose out on winning a championship. They could lose out on a scholarship.
Yeah, that scholarship thing is a pretty big one, especially since, like, again, you think about it, like, let's say there's 1,000 women competing in some kind of, like, a sport, and you have, like, 5 trans women. Those trans women are going to float to the top, generally speaking, and so that's where those scholarships are kind of unfortunately going to get taken away. You know, there's no perfect solution because there's no trans person that's trying to do anything malicious, but then it's like, damn, you have to exclude somebody who loves the sport so much from that competitive sport. It is unfair, but there's going to be an unfairness. You know, your question really is, like, who are you going to be unfair to? The 1% or the 99%? It's just an unfortunate conversation because I feel bad. Like, who would want to take away somebody's, like, joy like that? Like, you just can't do something, you know? That's why I think that airplanes are ableist because I can't fly them without perfect vision. All right, it's fucked up.
they could lose out on a job. You know, like if a trans person
but it
joins
is
the
really
WNBA,
unfortunate.
they're obviously going to be taking away a spot from somebody. And I don't know if women want to be competing with somebody that was born a man who could be like some 7-foot tall person that transitioned later in life, and then they join the WNBA and they're just dominating and dunking on people. And I guess it would make it more entertaining for the league, but then eventually it'll just be dominated by trans people. So I don't know if they really want to go down that route, but I don't know. Maybe we should consult with the experts. You know, one of Adam's 10,000 trans friends, it's hilarious how much he brings this up. Like every 10 minutes he says, you know, I'm not an expert, but I have a trans friend I could talk to about this. Like he sounds like Rick from Pawn Stars if all his experts were trans people.
Again, I'm not an expert on this, and you know, I'd love to. This is the kind of topic where I really want to make sure that I know the research and that I'm, you know, also speaking to trans folks, you know, in this conversation. But so to touch on just what I've, you know, I have a friend who has a trans kid. Don't know the kid's exact age, but you know, in the age range that we're talking about, and you know, he's explained that like, well, you know, my child from a very young age consistently like said, I am a girl.
Well, I don't think that has anything to do with sports. That might be true. I'm not going to really speak to that. I'm not super interested in it, but what does that mean? You can be a pilot without 20/20 vision. I could have swore that you had to be 20/20 vision to be a pilot, dude. Don't you need to have 20/20 vision, like perfect vision, to be a pilot? Or you have to be colorblind? I'm colorblind. I don't know. It's ableist. Shut up. Stop fucking correcting my jokes, dude. What the hell? What are you here for? Huh? You're gonna make me look stupid? It's working. It's working, bro. Anyway.
Like, and has never contradicted themselves, never changed their mind. And so the humane thing and the thing that he felt was good to do as a parent was to like embrace that choice on his child's part, right?
Okay.
But if that's who they are, if they think that they're a girl, why do you have to give them hormones to make them more of a girl?
Are they?
Because I'm sorry, can you expand on the question?
I don't understand the question
Simple
either.
question. If you say that the child thinks it's a girl, so you're going to give the child hormones.
So what trans people
I'm not. I feel like we're probably missing a lot of context. I don't think you should give hormones to a kid. But just generally speaking, the way that this works is it's not like a kid's like, oh, I think I'm trans, and they're like, okay, let's give you hormones. It's more of like, I'm having these symptoms. I'm having like an immense amount of distress associated with like my gender and my sex not aligning. That's distressing me. I need to do something about it. And then the treatment to that would be to go on hormones. Obviously not at like a super young age, but that would be what we're talking about there.
Express. And again, I'm not an expert. This is from me talking to my trans friends and you know, seeing what other trans folks say. Look, so all I can do is defer to the experts that I know about this, right? So, you know, for instance, there's an author named Bryn Tannehill who's a former military helicopter pilot. I just interviewed her for my new podcast. So look, I know quite a few trans folks, right? I do know also among the trans folks that I know, or the trans people who speak about this that I've heard. I'm very curious, and this is what I'd go consult my friend or my recent interview, such as Bryn Tannehill's, work on this to see how many. But I would really I've sort of reached the limit of like my facility with this topic. I really want to shout out videos made by a friend of mine. Her videos are called ContraPoints. Her name's Natalie Wynn, and she does these. She's a former philosopher, former philosophy PhD.
This guy wants to
and
fuck
she does these
with me.
incredibly funny videos. When we're talking about an issue that affects those people, right? The first thing we should do is listen to those people. When we talk to the actual trans folks, right, and talk to, you know, say, hey, what do you think? You know, how do you feel?
But we also have a different conversation. We talk to people that have regret from trans.
But yeah, it's good to talk to trans people about how they feel, but that doesn't really change the data about, you know, competing in sports and whatnot. So, but yeah, cool.
Surgery.
I guess I think that this conversation is just kind of all over the place, like in the editing. So they might not be talking about sports in this context. They might just be talking about trans people.
Sure, but we don't have either of those folks in the room.
Right,
you
but
know?
we have to acknowledge that they're real as well.
Sure. Look, yeah, detransitioners are real. There's like some people are misdiagnosed. Some people don't, you know, there's multiple, some people there are detransitioners that need to be talked about. Some people are misdiagnosed. Some people don't get the financial support that they need to be able to transition, so they detransition. Some people don't get the emotional support they need. And the data is not complete yet. You know, needs to be something that's continuously studied, and we just adjust as we continuously study. You know, and so far, based on all the information we have, we're on the right path. So that's it.
The last conversation I had with a person about this was a trans military veteran who is a researcher who wrote a book on these issues, right? Comprehensively looked at the research and told me that the research shows that the evidence that you're asking for exists, maybe not on a 30-year timeline, but there have been studies of this, and here's what we know about them, right?
About children transitioning?
Yeah, I mean that is my understanding.
Yeah, there isn't enough to like truly know, the long-term impacts. And hopefully they'll go really well. The short-term studies all indicate that we're like the way that we treat gender dysphoria in kids is correct. Maybe that'll change as time goes on. The unfortunate reality of the world is that there's no way to figure it out until you try it. So we just kind of have to pray to God. You know what I mean? And I hope we're doing things the right way. That's all you can do sometimes, man. So
I have not looked at the research myself. Including those folks in this conversation is a really critical part of it for me.
Sure.
Might have been a good idea for you to.
I mean, how many people are trans? What's the numbers on that?
I don't know, but I would consult my friend Bryn's book to find out, because I'm sure it's in there, because she wrote a book that breaks down all these statistics.
This is such
everything you need to know about trans.
Minefield of a subject,
and I'm not an expert on that, and I don't want to claim to be, right?
Yeah, so he was just stuck in this loop, and most of the podcast he just sounded so confused.
Way more women involved in gymnastics than men.
Oh, absolutely. But those are the sports that get the less attention, right?
Gymnastics
and we have
gets huge amounts of attention.
Sure does. It's one of the rare examples of like.
And he couldn't find any topic that Joe would agree with him on. And it's so funny because he'd start talking about something. He's like, "You'd have to be an idiot to believe this," and Joe's like, "Well, actually, I believe that, and I think you're completely wrong about this." Like at one point, they're talking about that amputee runner who killed his girlfriend, Oscar Pistorius, and Adam's like, "Can you believe people actually think that his prosthetic leg helped him in any way?" And Joe's like, "Well,
that makes sense because you don't like your muscle doesn't get weakened and you have like lactic acid." Was that the guy with like a double amputee where he was like running on the thing? I mean, it makes sense to me why that prosthetic might help in your calves. Right, you don't have to get shin splints, So
I think it did.
And people were saying about this guy that his prosthetic gave him an advantage. Now, first of all, there's no way that's true, because he doesn't have muscles. Muscles convert food into.
It does give you an advantage. I mean,
you think so?
I think mechanically it does, because they're springs. They essentially the way his leg works with those things.
Hold on a second, that's not an advantage.
Muscle
because
Build
how
super
mechanics work,
chatted $9.99. I think we should legalize exogenous hormone usage. Good for the trans community and bodybuilders.
True.
Win-win.
Yeah. That's a fantastic point. Legalize everything. Don't just have the. I think that what I'm gonna do is, but when I have a kid, if I have a daughter, she's gonna become trans, and then I will use the testosterone. Boom. How about that? What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Is that a spring, you put energy into it, and you get a little bit less energy out, right? So because that's the laws of thermodynamics, right? You can get more out than you put in.
But at least this is a subject where he doesn't need to talk about consulting one of his trans experts again. But, obviously the trans stuff is going to be the most divisive topic. That's where they had the most disagreements. And then at the end of the episode, it's so funny. He started talking about the moon landing, because I guess on his TV show, he did a whole episode on that, about how, like, there's no way it could have been faked. And he starts giving reasons why. And immediately Joe's like, well, that's one of the reasons why people say it's fake. And he's like, I used to be a total denier. I thought for sure it was fake. And Adam's just like, oh, man, I shouldn't have brought this up, because they already had so many disagreements. And obviously it was not going well for Adam. So by the end of this.
But does Adam actually, does Joe think it's fake? Okay, I don't even care.
I think he's just defeated.
Oh, this is one of my favorite videos we ever did. So, it's about how the moon landing. The thesis is the moon landing could not have been faked. It would have been harder to fake the moon landing than it would have been to actually go to the moon, because that specific claim. I don't know about that. I mean, I feel like it would probably be easier to fake it than actually go to the moon. The moon's crazy. That's like that's not even. You can't even drive there. That's fucking nuts. It's actually very far. It's a little far. So that seems interesting to me. Technology to fake it did not exist. Like, and we talked to a forensic film guy, and he walked us through it. He's like, look, the shadows are parallel, right? They're not diverging. A close light source, the shadows would diverge, right?
So wait a minute. You know that's like one of the big arguments for the moon hoax, is that the shadows intersect. The shadows indicate multiple light sources.
Well, that is because
but that's one of the main arguments.
That is I believe that's reflected light. Okay, I'm getting past my memory of this segment.
Yeah, dude, I used to be a full-on moon hoaxer. I fully believed we never went to the moon.
I shouldn't have brought this up.
I watched the documentary that was on Fox TV while I was on news radio. Like,
yeah, so they had a lot of disagreements throughout the podcast.
Well, I want to see what was Joe's argument again. It sounded like Joe doesn't believe that anymore. So what's his argument now? It's interesting. Jesus.
It never really got heated at all. Joe had a lot of patience with this guy. Like, the most annoyed Joe would get would be when Adam would say something ridiculous, and then Joe would be like, what are you saying, dude? Let me explain to you how that makes no sense.
Most of the games that we've constructed are actually sort of biased towards a male type of body, right?
That sounds ridiculous. First of all, the reason why...
So then, like I said, a few years after this, Adam went on Hassan's live stream, and Hassan brought up the podcast, and they started talking about it.
I was excited to do this interview because at the time, Joe was not so directly associated with like the far right. Like he hadn't totally made that turn yet. All right, I mean, I'll go to bat for what I think is right here as best I can. But you know, when the dude is like locked and loaded with like, you know, Jamie pull that up shit of whatever pseudoscience he wants to bring up, it wasn't the best position to be in. And you know, so that's my biggest bummer about it was like,
well, you're a bummer,
he was not really into the idea of having like an honest. He turned it immediately into a boxing match. And I wanted to have a conversation. So all the backlash was like, "Oh, Rogan owned you. He won a debate against you." I was like, "I thought I was having a conversation." Like,
yeah.
I thought I went
guess
on
he
to
won
just
the
like
conversation
talk about my show, and he turned it into a fist fight, which that's what I don't like about it.
Yeah, so maybe he really just didn't know what the podcast was like, or he should.
I've seen like a bit of that podcast a while ago. It's been years, but I don't think that was it at all. I mean, maybe because of the backlash, Adam got a little upset. And made it feel like that in the aftermath, because you know fans can be toxic about stuff, but that wasn't like Joe didn't like turn it into an actual like brawl or anything. I think that's a dishonest. I think that's a dishonest recalling of the events. Okay, it's not fair. I'm getting my fucking booty hole pushed.
Just coping. You know, I think it's just a combination of both. But I think if he knew what the podcast was like, he probably wouldn't have gone on there. And also, he's saying Joe went far right afterwards, but Joe had already been associating with a lot of people on the far right. I think maybe he toned it down a little bit. Like, before Adam was on there, he already had on Steven Crowder a bunch of times, Milo Yiannopoulos, Alex Jones, and Stefan Molyneux, like all those kinds of people. And also, if you're familiar with Joe's podcast at all, you should have a pretty good idea of what he thinks about trans people competing in women's sports and kids transitioning at a young age and all that stuff. And it's funny, Adam's like, I thought I was just going to go on there and talk about my TV show, which they did talk about quite a bit, and that still led to arguments. Like at the beginning of the podcast, Adam brought up an episode from his show where they talk about alphas and betas, and he said that's not a real thing and women aren't attracted to like one over the other. And
well, that's not true.
of course, Joe completely disagreed with that. But again, the argument never really got that intense. It's not like they're yelling at each other.
I mean, obviously, like, women tend to be attracted to more masculine men. There's nothing wrong with being a non-masculine man, okay? There's a person for everybody.
Each other or anything. But of course, Adam, he describes it as a boxing match, and he makes it sound like it's this serious debate that he didn't want to get into at all. Even though if he didn't want to get into an argument, he probably shouldn't have gone into his theories about sports. I mean, Joe Rogan is the last person you want to bring that stuff up to, especially if you barely even thought it through. So I don't know why he went into that, and I don't know how he expected Joe to just let that slide and not question it at all. And then once he brought it up, he couldn't really go into it because he hasn't consulted with the experts yet. So I mean, this whole thing was just hilarious. But let me know what you guys think about it down in the comments. And then make sure you go check out my Patreon account. I have a bunch of videos up there, probably over 20 at this point. Most of them are pretty long. And I just posted one about Kramer's infamous meltdown at the Laugh Factory. That's a wild story, so make sure you go check that out. I'll put the link in the description. And then make sure you hit the like button here, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you at the next video.
All right. Well, that's a good video. It was interesting. Interesting stuff.